welcome to the Creative Outcomes podcast at Upsource. My name is Craig Baldwin, one of the co-founders and partners at Upsource. And today I'm lucky enough to be joined by a somewhat long-time Upsource client, All Right, the All Right Studio, based in Brooklyn, New York. Although I think they're probably in the respective apartments in different locations today. I have Spencer, Tucker, and Garrett, all partners of the business. How we doing, guys?
Doing great. Busy Friday over here, but making our way through it.
Okay, well, good. Busy. It's better be busy than not, especially in the agency
hmm
world.
hmm
So we were talking off camera a little bit, and was hoping to start with just a genesis story about All Right, what you guys were up to personally, professionally before you started it, what caused you to start it, and maybe how the first 6 to 12 months went when you started your studio, your agency.
Yeah, I'll start on this. There are there's two or three really distinct eras of All Right. I do in many ways consider the current one, not in many ways, the current one is the one. But in terms of how we started, I originally started All Right Studio with two other partners about 8 years ago. It was myself, my married partner Hope, and one of my best friends Ian Williams. Um, Ian and I were really the impetus for it, having come from many years of working for other people. We were both just, I think, really obsessed with the craft of how to make websites. It's not something that I had necessarily always done in my own practice, but I really got obsessed with it, as I said. Basically, we started All Right as a vehicle to do any type of work that we felt was interesting with any type of client that wanted to pay us. And we weren't necessarily shooting for the Nikes or the whatever. We are kind of now because we really want to work with those kinds of people. But so we spent a few years focused on web, small projects. Over time, the focus really narrowed into what it is now. And there was a moment where my two business partners became zero business partners, and then became three business partners. I'll hand off the story here in a moment, but the kind of beginning, the genesis of that was we had met Spencer during a really crucial time in the studio. He actually brought us a potential project on the website, where he was going to be a creative director on the branding side. I do believe that project fell through for several years, but it just got us talking. He was abroad at the time. I was in Brooklyn at the time. And, as you'll probably hear from him, he is really good at talking all the time, and we just talked all the time. And the thing that brought everything together was his knowing of Tucker. And we all met at this legendary place called Orbar. It was the day that we invited Spencer to be a business partner at All Right, which at that point was hardly a company at all. We had several beers at Orbar, and thus a legend was born.
Yeah, I mean that about sums it up. I think the only other bit of color is maybe what the first 6 months of operations look like, or first 6 to 12, which basically was almost exactly 5 years ago, like to the day, when we all came together. Um, it was March 2020, and like the night that we hung out at Orbar, I think was something like March 11th, or 10th, which is important because I believe it was like March 12th or 13th that all of New York City and like the entire country shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we came together as like a partnership unit, people that were kind of like creatively aligned, decided to start working together, and then right away the bottom fell out. Um, and in a strange twist, like we just got really busy. And so we spent the first 6 months at least working together, pretty much entirely remote, like just doing this, a lot of video calls and working through things as like a 3-person group remotely. And then, like, by the middle of the summer, we got a studio space in Bushwick, started working in the same space together. And that's kind of what set off the studio on the trajectory that we've been on since 2020.
That's awesome. And then, Tucker, what's been your role? So, Spencer, I know you come from a CD background. Garrett, you basically still play the CD role at All Right, to my understanding. Tucker, how do your skills and your personality fit into the fold here with All Right Studio?
I had a much less traditional path into this industry. I actually started out in finance and financial technology, moving to the city when I was like 20. Went through a bunch of different careers and passed through that and wound up being really interested in the tech side of things. And then that led to the creative technology side of things. So around 2015, 16 or so, I just sort of up and quit my job, took a summer off, taught myself how to code, and then wound up basically freelancing for agencies and people I was introduced to. I got very lucky with a friend of mine, shout out Dan Batten, who's critical to the story in several aspects, but helped me put on with a lot of clients. He was at the time working for this agency, famous classic New York agency, Gin Lane, who had a bunch of previous clients that they had pushed out. He introduced me to them. So it wound up being really like the life cycle of my freelance job there. Took some time full time with agencies on and off as a developer, front end developer, creative developer. And then yada yada through a few years was introduced by that same friend to Spencer, who had spent some time at Gin Lane with Dan, and sort of net out in this good little freelance tandem of Spencer designing and myself building projects for various clients. We did that for, 6 months, 12 months, something like that. And then the whole time, I had heard of All Right. Again, because I don't come from an agency background, my knowledge of this world is much less than these guys was at the time. So it was all sort of this like friend of friend nature. But yeah, Spencer had always talked about this. He started working with Garrett more, wanted to introduce us, and then yeah, kind of spiraled into that fateful night in March in 2020 where we all met up and kind of started all of this stuff, and it's been pretty much upward since then.
That's awesome. Okay, so that was about 5 years ago, I guess, right? Almost to the day, basically. Um, where are we at now? What's All Right like today? And, how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think now it feels like a very real company. For a while, it was just the three of us, in a room together. Definitely a real company then, but really like three dudes with like an army of freelancers that were orbiting us. And now we are 10 full-time staff with a smaller army of freelancers still orbiting us. And getting to 10 was kind of our goal since actually we started working with Upsourced and having a little bit more of a strategic vision of the future. Work wise, I think that what we're selling hasn't changed a ton. Just in that it's design technology. There's a little bit more production happening now, and then also a lot more strategy. We were selling strategy when we first started working together in 2020, but people weren't really paying us for it. It was a service that we were just offering as a little bit of a value add, a little bit of something that like we needed to make better work happen. And then kind of through that first year, figured out how to make that an actual discipline and something that people were hiring us for. So now all of our projects have like a pretty robust and bespoke strategy phase that then moves into the making of things, whether that's design or art direction, creative direction, like production, kind of pre-production development, and then ultimately the output of those first two phases being something that is produced, whether it's a website or packaging or a campaign. And then ultimately we're very involved now too in like the launching of work and making sure that things go into the world correctly. Um, but we're really focused this year on figuring out how to better define our narrative as an agency, what makes us different, why you should hire us and not the other guys. And I think a lot of that goes back to how we work and what we're working on, where historically we've been able to do a lot of different things, and we're realizing, and we've always kind of known this, and it's been a challenge since we started working together, but we're realizing that it's hard for the people that hire us sometimes to wrap their heads around everything it is that we do. And so we're actually trying to maybe, if not actually simplify the service offering, simplify the way we talk about it.
I think that we've sort of fallen backwards into this place where we used to be very reluctant to have any sort of commitment to, conversion, KPIs, commitment to like actually metrics like that, because, we were a creative services business. And we found as we've grown, sort of working with larger companies, that those are so much of the drivers that we really need to embrace that a little bit more and start to understand how to quantify our value. And it really simplifies things rather than looking at this like service offering package of strategy, design, development, production, implementation, all of that, which is really what are the KPIs that they care about and what do our services, like what do the tools in our tool set contribute to those KPIs and how can we quantify that to these people?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So one thing that I've always felt as kind of a layman, but also someone who just interacts with many, many, many agencies, studios, etc. It's got to be hard to stand out, especially. I mean, you guys are in Brooklyn. I'm sure you could like kick a football and hit 20 agencies nearby. How would you describe the aesthetic, I guess, for lack of a better term, of what you do and why the all right approach may or may not be right for a potential client?
That's it's really loaded because I do think that back to what we were saying, it almost all started because we hated the idea of being recognizable. It was way more fun to be super flexible and kind of shapeshiftery. I think that the thing we've started to kind of come together on, and I'll let the other guys back me up on this, is we've always felt that our value is partially in how we work and how we do what we do, and less necessarily what it looks like, even though that has a high standard of quality. I think that where we're starting to find our footing is in our just kind of diehard ability and drive to just like get with our clients and really, really, really care. I know that's something that a lot of agencies will say, but it really comes across in a different way when you're a super small agency. There's a lot of kind of talk around being a small studio that can operate at a large agency capacity. But I think in the ways that that tends to happen, you do lose a little bit of what I think each of the three of us bring to the table. Just an absolute commitment to operations, to technology, to how we sell ourselves. I mean, that's a huge part of it, is that we just didn't know how people wanted to think of us. And so if all three of us are kind of coming together and I think holding up our own end of the integrity, that means we hit all of the points equally. And I think in many ways that translates to our projects. We run them as amazingly as I think we possibly can. We put a lot of work into our ops team. And we no longer miss deadlines. We deliver everything on time. We deliver it all the way to the scope and then some. And we're super flexible. I mean, like just this morning, we took on a new web build project that we hadn't expected to, and Tucker volunteered to just do it himself. And I think it's those moments you don't get with the bigger agency because it's more spread out. And I don't want to kind of commit us to any one point in time, but I see that as a lot of the beauty because we're thinking about those KPIs, but we're also just like still willing to do the work and have fun and like make it count.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was with a pretty big group of agencies this week in Nashville. Garrett, I think, are you in Nashville? Sorry.
That is where I currently live. Yeah.
Sorry. I was in East Nashville all week with a big
me.
group of agencies, an organization called the Nostos Network that we spend time with. And one of the agencies talks about how they work with a really large client who already has an agency of record. And that agency of record, the client spends hundreds of millions of dollars with that agency of record, and they feel like they just get nothing in return. And so they still find themselves turning to what might be considered boutique or what might be considered independent agencies, because not only is the quality of work there, but certainly the value for the money, but the attention that they get is so much greater than the agency of record. And I think that is a story that we hear time and time again, and why really large brands just continue to oscillate from the big holdcos versus going boutique, especially for specialized projects or specialized problems that they're trying to tackle within their organization. And so it just feels like the room for indies to play a role is always going to be there. And if anything is beginning greater over the last 5 to 10 years, maybe even longer than that. So that's really good to hear. So I'm going to go a little bit in a different direction and maybe make this a little bit of a self-serving question. But at what time were you like, we think we need an accounting firm or an accounting solution or anything that remotely looks like that? Like, what was the genesis of feeling that way? And then, of course, eventually working with Upsource. How did that start?
Yeah. Well, I think, from the jump, we had out of house finance partners. Certainly, like in those initial years, we really did not know anything about how to effectively run a business or manage a bank account or, pay attention to margin or any of that. But we got really lucky in that, I mean, one, it was like 2020, people were willing to spend money. And also, we were able to do, the work of essentially like a small agency between three people. So we made a lot of money, frankly, but we also spent a lot of money. And I think like after our first year of operations, which was like really successful, but also really hectic, we kind of like looked at the books and realized that, while we had had a really good year, we were also kind of down bad. Like, I believe that first year we had brought on a couple people and had to run our last payroll of the year out of our personal bank accounts, which was like incredibly humbling and made us feel really stupid because there were times in that year where we'd had like a massive surplus of cash. And so we like began the hunt for accounting partners that were more than just people that would, do our taxes for us. And we had a range of different firms over the course of probably 3 years, all of whom were like frankly horrible. I think it was also one of those interesting lessons for us where the people that we worked with initially that were like lawyers and accountants, we basically just worked with the first people that essentially said yes to us, where they were these like more esoteric kind of like white collar industries. And we assumed that, anybody that would be willing to work with like a small kind of like ramshackle creative agency must be like worth their salt. They were doing us a favor by letting us be their client. And we learned really quickly the hard way that as with like any industry in the world, there is kind of this like bell curve of talent. A lot of people are like right in the middle there, not really particularly good or bad. But I think also left to their own devices without much oversight can like veer bad. And so we just were burned a lot.
We learned that lesson several times over, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it was also, I don't know, one of those things where like, I don't know, we would just be like, surely like this can't be, like the work product of these people, but we also didn't have anything to check it against. So we were just kind of like, all right, I guess this is what it looks like working with like an out of house financial partner. But years passed, and I think we still had some like rinky dink firm working with us. But we moved into this new building in Bushwick, and our upstairs neighbors are upsourced clients, Porto Rocha.
Shout out.
They recommended upsource to us and said that you guys had done great work for them and been really helpful and, helped them get to where they were at the time. And, now they're even further than that. Um,
All right. So, Spencer, tell me. So, obviously, you guys had some poor experiences, previous accountants, and any number of other things you were getting from those professionals. We come into the picture. Hopefully we did a great job in those early days, but I'm sure it was mixed, and you're trying to figure out was this the right decision, and eventually I'm sure we got to a good cadence, and you liked what you were seeing. In terms of like having a partner, whether it's upsourced or anybody else for that matter, that they're delivering on the service, especially as it relates to accounting and all the reporting that comes with that, like how did that change, if at all, how you run or manage the business day to day, month, quarter to quarter?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of changed in tranches where initially there was just a lot of education involved in us understanding exactly what upsourced is doing for us, where there was a lot that we didn't know what we didn't know, and we had to sort of learn how, um, I guess, like financial accounting actually works and like what the point of it all is. So the first few months working with you guys, I think it was a lot of your team um, explaining to us like what they were delivering on, showing us a lot of like metrics and like I don't know, like health and performance metrics that were helpful, but I think more so were there for us to know that objectively you were doing your jobs. And then as time went on, we had more of a framework and also a benchmark to understand when progress had been made. And so that's, I think, now where we are, where we're able to compare like current performance and progress to years past and have a better understanding of like where we've been and where we're going. And then also, I think beyond that, the first year we worked with Upsourced, I think it was 2022, like things were really good for that entire year until sort of the end of the year when like interest rates spiked and people stopped spending money and things kind of changed in like the macroeconomic landscape in the US. And then we needed more help. And so we worked with Upsourced on, sort of just like putting the checks in place so that if the worst were to happen, we would be safe. Things like getting a credit line and just like having a business plan of if this, then that stuff, if whatever, like the money started to run out or the client started to disappear. And thankfully, like, everything has been fine, but it's been a challenging few years for small businesses, and definitely having a partner that, I think in like the worst of times is able to just tell us that we're going to be okay. And in the best of times is able to work with us to be a little bit more proactive. And, take those moments where like things feel good and we're up and leverage that into more progress and success. It's just been, I don't know, it's felt like a luxury in some ways, but it's definitely helped keep us sane.
Think there was also a critical moment too of like us sort of sampling out different versions of business advisors through the years. We had like gone to fellow creatives, people that we looked up to when we were younger, when we were getting started out, and they were all helpful for periods of time. I mean, mostly to do what Spencer had just mentioned there of like reassuring us that everything is okay and that it is normal to get yelled at by your client. It is normal to miss a deadline. It's all these things that we were experiencing and we didn't know how to feel about it. Like we weren't a bad agency because we had like an argument with a client. And then we quickly got to a place of realizing that we not outpaced, but we were just at a level too where the people we were going to weren't going to be able to answer these questions. They were experiencing the same thing, and we kind of got to this like place of stalling out on being helpful there. And I think switching to someone like Upsource, which is a little bit more financial focus, a little bit more sober in their assessment of us and, the industry, a little bit less, you know, creatively emotional, I guess would be a way to put it. It was a very good like balancing point for us to really look at it like a business and less like you know essentially I think the guys would agree with me too that it was difficult for us to bridge our freelance mentality into a place of a business mentality, and that was probably a few years of the business where we really treated it like a large freelance practice. And I think that there was a few things that happened that made us realize that it really didn't work like that, and that we had to sort of shift our focus to understand that we were owning and operating, effectively a, if not large, medium-sized creative business.
Totally. One thing I've always wondered, I mean, I've experienced myself as a business owner, but honestly, it's been a little bit since this has occurred. In the early days, especially as the three of you are working on client projects yourselves and working in the business as opposed to on the business, right? Because especially as you're growing very quickly, you kind of oscillate between these two things all the time until you get to that level where you can start to replace yourselves on that client work. Like, talk to me about that experience and how challenging or not that's been, and how you're obviously, all three of you are very experienced at working in the business with clients, right? But recognizing when you should, as you said earlier, Tucker, think about the business as an entity and having long-term goals for that entity and making decisions with a business point of view as opposed to a freelancer point of view. That's very, very hard for many agencies as they're first beginning. Just talk to me a little bit about that process and sort of things you learned that were very important. And I don't know if you'd probably change anything, but maybe what that hindsight has afforded you now, especially 5 years into running this really successful studio?
I mean, of the three of us, and not to, put anyone on a soapbox or the opposite of that, but it's been really, really hard for me in particular. I think that all three of us would agree on that. I think that there is, and I say this a lot, I think that there's something that each of us three bring to the table, both in skill set as well as just like straight up attitude and ability to like check each other. And one of the things that has taken me a very long time, but I feel really kind of happy and proud of all three of us that I'm getting there, is we put a lot of work into being really good at what we do. And that means that we are able to not even financial rewards, but reap like actual tangible rewards in our day to day for having put in that work. And that means a really talented staff who can do stuff even better than you can. And where I, in particular, am trying to take that in my own kind of work life is, recognizing the value that we bring as craftsmen to something like akin to a factory in many ways. And making sure that the work that we're doing can get the right attention from all three of us is so much more helpful than me or Spencer and Tucker doing every single thing ourselves because we believe that we're the best ones to do it. And so for me in particular, that means that I'm trying to trust our staff a lot more, which has turned out great, by the way. And honestly, turn my attention to the stuff that I want to do that kind of gets us into the realms that I want to push more into. Like, I think honestly, some of the web and more artistic leaning work that I personally like to do, and the two guys here with me feel really strongly about, that's starting to fall into more of my lane because that provides such a great antidote to really big, massive, complicated services. And I think back to this idea of maybe we don't need to tell everyone we do everything, but we do need to show them that we have a really well-rounded perspective because that's part of our value as a specific agency. So I think in this way, Tucker's building a lot of the websites that are not necessarily budgeted enough for our actual partners. I'm doing a lot of the design that's like smaller or quicker. Spencer's doing all of that like on the ground footwork for new business. This is stuff that is a little bit more grindy, but it's also like away from the day-to-day production very intentionally. So, and maybe I explained that wrong, but
It's to your point earlier as well too of like, talking about the companies with the larger agencies of record that become too democratized. We kind of oscillated between this place of being the three of us that did everything and we really broke our backs to try and get everything done and took so much responsibility and emotional like gravitas about all the work that was happening. And then, tried to push up and try to tell ourselves that, we really needed to democratize the work and step away from it a little bit. And I think that was really difficult, as Garrett said, particularly for him and some of like the real like design ownership and aesthetic point of view of the company. And then we brought it back down a little bit and did more of the work. And so we've kind of been like oscillating up and down around this point of like, what is the right level of involvement for us to have? What is the right level of opinion for us to have? What is the right level of control? And what is the right time to like step back and let, younger, newer minds in our staff or people that have a different point of view really not reshape but contribute to the idea and the point of view and the aesthetic that is the studio that we feel so attached to.
Totally. Yeah. Well, one thing I really liked about you guys as I've gotten to know you personally is you are, at least I find you're incredibly mindful of your staff and the team and what the team means and the culture, not just how they're feeling and how they're working, but how that impacts the work product itself, right? Like I've come across hundreds of agency owners and I've found very few who are as mindful as you. And again, I employees probably always feel a little bit differently, but just from my perspective, I find you guys to be very empathetic and, you are working very hard, I know, in the background to support your team and put them in a place for success.
We'll make sure they listen to this.
Yeah. What is
they hear this.
what's that been like? Because I know there's a lot of growing pains, right? Especially the problem with being sub 10 people is everybody feels everything, right? And it's almost always, I always liken it to like the pirate ship. Like usually people have multiple roles. And sometimes we are both doing the same type of work. And so when do you sit down and I do the work? And when do I sit down and you do the work, right? And so there's some really good stuff that comes out of that, but there's also a lot of friction that comes out of those early days. So maybe talk about like what it's been like maybe just to grow that team, grow it in an intentional or mindful way, because at the end of the day, you could have just stayed the three of you as the owners and hired nothing but contractors, right? Like you could have just done that in perpetuity. You haven't. You've decided to bring in a team and empower people to grow and contribute to your culture. That's a very conscious decision, and it's not easy to do. Just talk about what that's been like over the last 5 years.
For sure. So, yeah, I think with studio growth, we've had this interesting trajectory, or pace rather, where we've never had like a moment of hyper scaling, or like growing really quickly. We've grown like revenue quickly, or even like the size of our clients pretty quickly, but the team has always come together sort of methodically, which I think we felt a lot of dissonance around for a bit, like earlier in the history of the company, just because we grew up in this era of like, if you're not going from like 1 to 10 to 100 in like 3 years, like, are you even a successful business? Um, but actually, the way that we have grown has felt very deliberate. We've taken our time hiring people. And I think also just being as small as we are, you mentioned, Craig, like, when you're 10 people, everybody feels everything. I think that's super true, especially in a creative environment where like each new person that you bring on can really change the output and like the feeling of the business. And so we've tried to think a lot about the types of personalities we're hiring, what we need, from like the standpoint of, like a team or like a group of friends, almost like what don't we have, and like what, types of personality we're trying to bring on in order to get, over here, or just to change like the vibes in the studio, frankly. Um, and then, beyond that, a while ago we like listened to a similar business podcast with this guy Archie Coates, who runs this agency called Playlab out in LA, and they run their agency. I mean, they have no focus deliberately. They do all these different kinds of projects that are all very artful, and he gave this like really poetic, like 40-minute talk to, I think it was like a class at Pratt, maybe, but he rounds out the whole presentation talking about how, like, even though Playlab does all these crazy projects that are so like shiny and impactful, the biggest project that they're working on is the studio. And I think that like really hit all of us, in the heart, where it really reframed the way that we've approached running the business, especially now that we're increasingly less involved in like the daily making of the work, where the studio itself is a big project, and the three of us need to treat it like something where there are going to be like milestones and deliverables and ups and downs and like project management basically that goes into the running of the business. um and a big part of that is the team, and also giving the team more responsibility so that we can focus on that broader project and be less in the weeds dealing with emails and client BS.
Totally. That's really hard to do, right? I mean, it's easy to sit here and say 5 years later, yeah, we've been doing that, we've done that, we will continue to do it, and here we are. But I'm sure in the moment, it's felt like a lot of starts and stops, and a lot of push and pulls, and a lot of friction, and a lot of hairy moments where, um, it's you're just like, why in the hell did I do this? At least maybe I'm just speaking for myself at this point, but it's certainly a common emotion, right? Um,
I think that we, constantly deal with that, especially in the place of, we really did reframe ourselves a bit to think of it as, the studio as the project in this way of we tried for a long time to really kind of couch our decisions in examples or references or things that we thought should or shouldn't happen. And at a point, we realized that we were sort of just like running our own ship, and it really just had to make sense to us. And the decisions had to be something that we felt comfortable with. And, the relationships, how we dealt with people, what we asked people to do or asked people for. And I think that was a big pivot in us and the way that we ran this is when we sort of stopped trying to not compare ourselves, but try and like justify our decisions in what we saw in the world around us and really made it more of just like what we wanted it, what we felt good about.
yeah, maybe that's a good segue, because in 2024, I guess, I'm trying to remember exactly when we started working together, but obviously you guys have been an upsource client for a little bit. And then I had the opportunity to work with all three of you for I don't know, maybe six plus months, whatever it may have been. And obviously we've kept in touch. Um, but my read on a lot of the conversations, and we worked on many things that were not necessarily how to grow or how to manage people or what the culture is like. We really talked about everything. Um, and I found quite often when we had those conversations, the three of you were always looking for some external validation on decisions that I felt like 99% of the time your intuition was correct, right? That the three of you are very talented, very intelligent, and now very experienced. Um, and you just needed someone to tell you, yeah, of course, that is the right decision. Just move forward, right? Talk to me about that experience. What did you like? What did you not like? Like, was that a helpful exercise when I worked with you guys? And do you feel like you've really found your voice as business owners, team leaders, et cetera? Because you've touched on this a little bit about using some other agencies as a frame of reference, but you kind of outgrew that, right? And now you have to depend on yourself a little bit more than maybe you even did before. Talk to me about that, because I know that is also a big part of starting and growing a business, that we all kind of have that feeling like, I don't know if we're ready for this, or I don't know if I trust myself to make this decision. But of course, it's only your decision to make, right?
The biggest thing you taught me was to trust our intuition, frankly. I'll put it at that.
Yeah, totally.
Well, we've learned everything we know now, on the job in one way or another. Like, we didn't have big agency jobs before this. We didn't have really any management experience. So we know now a lot about how to run this business. I don't know that we know everything about how to run businesses in general, but we've definitely like put in our like 100,000 hours at this point. But I think actually on like the validation point, this is something I think about a bit, where a lot of my focus these days is just kind of like business operations. And for the most part, the only validation I get is that like we get to keep going. You know, there's not a lot of moments where you, I don't know, either get like applause from the team or a client, or like you release something out into the world and everybody's like, wow, that's so good. You did such a good job with that. Especially coming from like this design background where there is a lot of validation involved in the work. And a lot of it's like pretty instant gratification, where like you show the client a good thing and immediately they're rewarding you for that work. So that took a lot of recalibration, I guess, and it's still really challenging, to just wrap a hard year and the reward be like another hard year. So it was nice for you to give us pats on the back here and there. And actually, I think that's maybe something we just need to do for like one another more frequently. Um, but I mean, I don't know. And another funny upsource related anecdote, like middle of last year, we were talking with Andrew Hall, who's our out of house controller and like, main point of contact at Upsource. And we were asking him if like we had permission to give ourselves raises, because we hadn't given ourselves a raise in like 2 or 3 years. And he like ran the numbers and was like, yeah, I think you guys can do it. Like, approved. And we did that. And that actually felt really good. I don't think we realized how good that would feel. So yeah, I don't know. I think like small carrots along the way go a really long way.
Yeah, I think it's also part of the thing too we talked about with like that shift from freelance or this being temporary. Because I think you asked any of us in those first few years, it was like, cool, maybe this will last another year, or maybe we'll do this for 6 more months, or like, when's the bottom going to fall out, or when are we going to like lose the client that was the whole reason we were able to do that? And then you sort of realize it's like these minute things that are happening really are just kind of part of the whole. And you get to this cadence where, yeah, now, the frame of reference now is not 6 months by 6 months. It's, 2 years or 3 years or 5 years by 5 years. And it really helps reframe it a little bit into also, yeah, not needing like, yeah. And I think it is a big point that our reward for doing this is that we get to continue doing this, and that like objectively it's a cool job. We get to do a thing that we started, that we love, that we put our, blood, sweat, and tears into, and it, objectively or subjectively succeeded in a lot of ways. And I think that like taking a moment to remember that at times is important. It's hard to do, but it's important. And I think that like those moments of gratification are just like the knowledge of what we've done rather than it is like the client really claps you on the back or someone tells you you did such a good job on this design or this site or this brand or this release or whatever it may be.
Totally. That reminds me of, it might be like a Mark Benioff quote, but he always says that you'll be disappointed what you can do in a year and you'll be amazed by what you can do in 10, and or something along those lines. And it's so true, right? Like I upsource is just about to hit 13 years, which is very, very strange to me. And in some ways we've been really successful. In some ways I feel like we literally are just getting started. And that is the paradox of business ownership, in my opinion. And so every time I look to the retrospective, I think, wow, I can't believe what we've done. But when I look forward, I think, oh my God, there's so much work to do. Right. But thankfully, and I'm sure you feel this way as well, I've never felt more prepared for the work that's ahead. And as long as we continue to think in proper increments of time moving forward, we know that if we do that and continue to take care of business, that maybe in 10 years, we'll look back and be even more amazed about what we've done and what we've built. Right. And so I think having that perspective, evaluating the success of the business over the longer term, having very long term thinking in general, is definitely the right thing to do. I mean, of course, we all want to grow a business really quickly and sell it and be really rich and famous, but not everyone gets that opportunity. And so just because it doesn't come to us quickly doesn't mean we still can't build something really amazing and great. And I think maintaining that mindset helps to steady the senses and ensure that you continue to build something worthy, even when you're frustrated in the moment. One thing, and maybe this is a good way to wrap, because I've seen tremendous growth from the three of you as a group individually, even in the short time that I've known you. Tucker, you said this objectively and subjectively. You guys have built something really wonderful. Hopefully, your team feels the same way, and they're very excited to be a part of it. But you've earned the right to continue to build something really special. You've earned the right to continue to grow and grow on your terms. And of course, we all have to close more business to do that. We have to work with the right relationships, and we have to offer the right services, and we have to find the right talent. These things are really challenging, but man, there's so much ahead of you, especially after only 5 years of being in business. And so if you were to pick your heads up now and look to the future, how do you feel about what you want to do over the next year, 2 years, 5 years? Like, what are the thoughts and what are your motivation at this point in time? And maybe we need to go to that bar in Brooklyn to talk about this. I don't know.
Headed to LA next week to do some visioning, so we might have better answers for you in like another week. But one thing I come back to all the time, like just in my own head, is you asked us this like kind of same question when we started our like consulting agreement, working directly with you on like a little bit of like business visioning, and my answer, like trying not to be super specific, was like I just want things to get easier. And you were like, it's never going to get easier. Like, it's never going to be easier than it is today. And I was like, and in my head, I was like, how is that possible? And you're like 100% correct. Like we're definitely more successful now. We're much further along and it's so much harder. So I think I no longer, you know, foolishly want it to get easier. Um, I think frankly, like I don't know what the future looks like, and that's kind of exciting. And that's been the way, if I really think about it, for a while, the way that we've operated, where like we never know who's going to email us, we never know what opportunity is going to fall into our lap. I think we're trying to take more control over our destiny and not rely entirely on inbound and like these crazy lucky opportunities. But there's been a lot of luck in the history of our business, and I think as long as we're able to like stay alive, we'll continue to get lucky. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about.
I think too, one thing that the perspective of the large time scale is also to, maybe in those initial times it's like, oh wow, all right, this is a business. Let's grow, scale, sell, that's it, find a path through there. And at this point you realize too, it's like this understanding of reality that this is probably a longer term thing than we maybe have like understood it to be helps to appreciate the points along the way. It helps to understand how to take minor wins from it as we get them, to appreciate the little steps, the little wins, the minor victories, and to really like entrench ourselves in this, in a feeling of really being able to sit in this for a while and feel good about what we're doing and feel a personal sense of accomplishment across the three of us for where we've come and what we want to do from it.
Yeah, I think it becomes increasingly clear every day that like whatever the three of us continue to make from this thing is what I want to do with it. That's kind of the end of the day. I want to make work that matters. I want to do stuff that lasts after we last, but that's super idealistic. And in this moment, I just want to keep running a business with my friends that just keeps my family in a house and lets us do cool work that not many people get to do. And that's a gift that I don't recognize enough. And I want to keep doing that.
That's really well said. I don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, I think each of you captured what has been this journey the last 5 years and where it could go so incredibly well. And I think anyone who listens to this will realize really quickly how thoughtful and introspective each of you are as it relates to the business that you're running, the team you're building, and where you want to go. And that's certainly the right attitude to continue to get better. Spencer, it's funny to hear you say that. I kind of forgot about the conversation we had about how things will never get easier. And that is definitely true. But what I have found is that your capacity through your experiences and your increased knowledge, your capacity to deal with those hard challenges and the challenges that continue to get harder just continues to get better over time, right? Like, and I guess maybe the proper output for that is the confidence. It's knowing that whatever that problem is around the corner, you're prepared to deal with it. You don't necessarily know the answer right away, but you have trust in yourself and trust in your team and your leadership team here. And that snowballs in a big way over time. It's hard to feel in the moment, but when you're able to build that confidence through the experience by messing everything up, and figuring out the right way to do it, it makes you just such a terribly dangerous professional and business owner and someone who runs a creative studio. I don't think it's going to be too much longer, and you guys are going to be offering tons of advice to other owners who are in your position, because you've experienced so many different things in a compressed period of time. And that's definitely something you should be proud of. And I think is going to lead to hopefully great success for All Right in the future.
Thank you.
Totally.
You'll be happy to know too how many Craig-isms are still thrown around to this day too.
I mean, yeah, you may have forgotten that conversation, but we bring it up probably once a month.
The pirate ship was referenced quite a few times as well.
Yeah. Yep. Well, what can I say? I'm a simple-minded person, so I like these very simple analogies. All right, guys. Well, with that, we will wrap. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, we have a lot of love for you guys, and very excited to see how you progress over many years to come. And certainly, we hope Upsource can play a small role in that journey. So, thanks for everything today.
Us too.